are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is about an exchange student who actually went missing while abroad. Now, when everyone involved in a case seems suspicious, who do you focus on? How do you find a missing girl who thought she found people to trust in this brand new country? How does someone vanish without a trace, including from all of the surveillance footage? I will warn you that there are a lot of different sources in this case that say different things. I do tell you when there are differences in information pieces, but it is very hard to find legitimate information in this case. Of course, we have the basics of the disappearance, but as far as when it comes to different witness statements and just little things, there are inconsistencies. So I did my best to find the proper information. I will link all my sources down below. I just want to let you guys know that up front. If you're going to be doing further research, it can get very difficult, but nonetheless, it's still very important to talk about, and that is why we are going to be talking about Carla Vincentini today. I want you to know that it's my absolute passion to tell these stories, and I mean absolutely no harm or disrespect when I do so. So if something you'd like to support me in doing, all you have to do is give this video a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below, and if you want to, you can also subscribe and turn the post notification bell on as well, because I post every single week or multiple times a week. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 2006 in New Jersey, and Carla Vincentini was a 22-year-old living in Newark. Now, she wasn't from the area. In fact, she wasn't from the United States at all. Carla had been born on April 29th of 1983 to parents Tonya and Orlando as the firstborn in a small town in Brazil. They had a lot of farms and agriculture in this town, and it wasn't a very big community. There wasn't a ton to do in this area. She also had two younger sisters, a 20-year-old named Fernanda and a 15-year-old named Andressa. But Carla absolutely adored her family. It was very, very close to them. But she always dreamed of visiting the United States because she had some friends who had done so, and so she wanted to live out her dream as well, and she had finally found a way to do so. She applied to be a foreign exchange student, and she was saving all of her money for like a year to be able to support herself while she was over there. And by 2016, her family was actually throwing her a goodbye party because on January 19th, she would be on a plane headed to New Jersey. Carla had set it all up to stay for the semester, so just a few months, but she was so ecstatic. She had a work visa, which was for about 5 months, I believe, and she was given the opportunity to work at a local restaurant called White Castle through the program. They had helped her find this job, and then they also helped her with boarding, where to live, and this was at a local motel called Roxbury Motel, and this was also a place where she would be staying in the same exact room as other foreign exchange students. This was so they could save money, but it was a little bit cramped of an area. But she got to meet people and kind of figure out who she could spend her time with, people who spoke her language, and she was going to be working on her engineering degree while also exploring this new country. Carla was a family girl, like I said, but she always updated her parents, called them at least every 2 days. And it was funny because her father, when she first said she wanted to go to the States to further her education, he was very worried about her, and he tried to keep her in Brazil. But finally, after she worked so hard for it, he realized that she was active, she was dynamic, and she could work hard and she would be fine. And so he was more than happy to let his little girl leave so she could blossom. And everyone actually called her Carlina instead of Carla as a nickname. That's just something she'd always been called growing up, and she could speak a little English, but it was very broken, and her native language was Brazilian Portuguese. So it was going to be difficult for her to speak to anybody in the States who did not speak Portuguese, but she wanted to try anyways. Although I never got the opportunity to meet Carla, I believe from what I researched that she was a very spontaneous girl, that she had an adventurous soul that didn't let fear stop her from going after her happiness and her future. And she was very focused on her well-being mentally. And I think that's so important. And she even decided that when she got to New Jersey, she started working, she started going to school, she started living in this motel, and she decided it wasn't for her. She wanted a different job. Her job at White Castle was not something that she was enjoying. She didn't enjoy being in this motel with the other girls. And so instead of sulking about it, she changed it. Carla quit the White Castle job and she quickly found a new one at Mediterranean Manor, which was much better for her. But next, she needed new living arrangements. And this is when she kind of called her parents to talk to them about what she was looking for and just, expressing to them that she was doing this for her well-being and that she believed she would be much happier elsewhere. Someplace that didn't have a 1-star rating and kind of dirty furniture and was filled with different girls who didn't have their own personal space. That is when her father, who was a businessman, told her that he actually had a client that was also a businessman who had an apartment in Newark, which was exactly where she was staying. This was actually a 70-year-old man named Jose Mardera Martin Fernandez, and he was more than willing to allow Carla to stay in his apartment that was empty half the time, and she could just stay in the living room and have all of that space, and all she would have to do is clean up, and that would pay for her rent. She was even able to bring another friend of hers who she had met through this foreign exchange program, who was named Eduardo Ribeiro, and Eduardo was kind of feeling the same thing about living in the motel, and she was so happy that Carla was inviting her to live with her, and so they were both going to go. It was just going to be a few months, so Jose said it was no big deal and they could absolutely stay. Jose told her parents that, he thought of her as almost like his child as well, since they were so close. This apartment was in the Ironbound neighborhood that was said to be a bit nicer of a neighborhood, and Jose said there was much more opportunities for work there. Carla was much happier with this new life that she had went out and acquired for herself with the help of her family, but she still made the initiative to ask for that, which is half of the battle, is asking for help when you need it. And so her family could tell over the phone that she was just feeling much more secure and she was where she wanted to be now. She didn't wait for her circumstances to change. She went out and changed them. And because most of the people who knew her said that she was very sweet, innocent, almost naive when it came to the world around her, they did worry about her. But this was a step in the direction of independence, maturity, and using her strength to her advantage, and so they were just really happy to see this. But this also, of course, made it very easy for her to reach her goals, because she didn't yet see the world as this dark, scary place, and she believed that all things good would occur to her, which is wonderful and beautiful, but unfortunately there has to be that side of us that also knows how evil people can be. And it's not said that Carla yet realized this, but that little town that she had come from was so sheltered, so small, and she had such a genuine heart intact. And unfortunately, that meant she was not likely to understand scary situations she was putting herself into. This leads us to the night of February 9th, just 3 days after she had moved into this new apartment. She was actually going to Eduarda, her roommate and friend's work. She had just started this job at Adega Bar and Grill at the 100th block of Ferry Street in the same neighborhood as her new apartment, so it was a really easy walk to get there, but it was cold and snowy this day, so she was not going to walk. Carla was said to get all dressed up in her white sleeveless shirt with a blue Hugo Boss jacket paired with either blue or white jeans. She then put on her high-heeled ankle boots and a large silver ring on her ring finger with a Mormet Sports wristwatch on her left wrist. She also layered 2 silver rope necklaces, but only one had a pendant on it. Other jewelry consisted of what she always wore, which was her silver ball in her belly button and in her tongue. She was ready to go by around 10:30, and she wanted to go and make friends at this bar, see Eduarda, and she just wanted to have a fun night as a 22-year-old. That's all she was asking for. One of her guy friends that she'd recently made was said to drop her off at this bar because it was snowy and she had a bag of clothes with her at this time. Now, I couldn't find whether this bag contained the clothes that she would then, of course, change into when she was at the bar, the clothing that I just told you about, or if this was a second spare change of clothes. This is some of, the inconsistencies in this case. We're not really sure where this bag came from or what clothes she had when she was changing, if she changed at the apartment or at the bar. But Carla worked hard in her life, and she had given her schoolwork and her new job everything she had. She deserved a night off, a night to feel safe. However, that's not what she would get. You see, that night around 2:30 a.m. to 3 a.m., so technically the next day of February 10th, Carla told Eduarda, who was still working behind the bar with customers, that she was going to step outside and that she would see her back at home when Eduarda got off work. Now, she had been drinking, and she said that she was going to go talk to a man near his car outside in the parking lot because he had a photograph he wanted to show her. Now, her friend Eduarda had seen this man talking to Carla all night, and so she didn't think too much of it. She was concerned for her friend, and she almost tried to stop her, but Carla said she would be fine. Eduarda really couldn't do anything because she was on the clock, and then Carla handed her a piece of paper with this man's phone number on it, and so she let Carla go. She really didn't have a choice. Her friend was an adult and could make her own decisions. And that is when Eduarda realized later on through the night she had misplaced this phone number amongst all of the receipts that she had gotten from customers. And she said, "I was dealing with money and lost it. We don't know if it was fake or real. I tried not to leave her alone with this guy, but it was impossible. She walked out with him, then disappeared." She was even more worried when she got home from work at around 4 a.m., not too long after Carla had left, to go to the parking lot, and Carla still wasn't home. And she realized quickly that something was wrong. She didn't return home that next day either, or, still the continuation of that day from the early morning that they had been out, and Eduarda didn't waste any time. She was said to go straight to the police station, and when Carla was reported missing, Eduarda told investigators about this man she had been with. She said he was Caucasian in his 30s, on the shorter side, around 5'8", and around 200 pounds. He was wearing a black t-shirt, but he was also said to have bright blue eyes and kind of a salt and pepper hair, kind of like he was a little bit older. He also had an unshaven beard, and she believed his name could have been Antonio, but that is all she knew about him, other than the fact that he seemed strangely quiet for being at this popular bar that had a lot of people who were singing and dancing and hopping around, and he just looked very sad and quiet and to himself, and the only person she believed he talked to was Carla. She didn't know how they could have been talking, though, because she said she only heard Antonio speaking English, and Carla barely spoke English, and if he didn't speak Portuguese, then she was unsure how they were communicating at all. Eduarda was then taken to make a sketch of this man for investigators. However, in a few Brazilian articles, they said that she did not want to make this sketch at all, and she actually didn't want to give much information in this case. Then the missing persons posters were created for Carla, and they said she was a Caucasian female with blonde hair and brown eyes with a pierced tongue, belly button, and ears. She also had several identifying tattoos with a yellow and red chameleon on her hip, a tribal design on her lower back, and a dark gray angel with open wings on her upper back. She had also fractured her right collarbone previously, and she stood at 5'7", weighing around 130 to 140 pounds at this time. She was now believed to have been kidnapped. and they believed it was from the bar. Witnesses from the bar that night were then spoken to, and this is where things began to be very difficult to decipher. You see, some people said that they saw Carla walking towards the direction of her apartment. However, she was alone. Others said they saw her getting into a car with a man, and then they drove off together. However, only one of these statements would make sense after investigators looked at the apartment that Carla had been staying at, where Jose had let her and Eduarda stay. You see, when they began searching through all of her belongings to see if they could find anything to help figure out where she would have gone, they then found Carla's wallet, her passport, the bag of clothes she was said to have taken to the bar, and the jacket she was wearing that night at the bar. These were all inside her apartment. Now, it appeared as though she had been back inside the apartment that night, which made it difficult to believe she had been taken from the bar. And this meant that she wasn't necessarily taken by the man that people had seen her leave the bar with, and who had been talking to her all night. So the question was, how did she get back to her apartment, and what happened to her from there? Investigators were said to trace Carla's footsteps that night, and they wanted to get the exact time period when she entered the bar and when she left the bar. So they went back to Adega and they asked for the surveillance footage, which they did have. They did have cameras. Most of them were pointed at the workers, or so they said, but they did have this footage and it did show customers. Now, it was claimed that the obtained surveillance footage was looked over and there was no sign of Carla anywhere on it. Not entering the bar, not sitting in the bar, not talking to Eduarda, and not leaving or being in the parking lot whatsoever. This meant that her exact timeline of when she left or entered could not be put together, and they had to go off of witness statements, which were all varied at this time. Days were passing and Carla had not gone back to her apartment. She had not been seen or spoken to. Her family had not been getting calls from her. And finally, the family back in Brazil was informed of her disappearance, and they were completely distraught being so far away and unable to do anything. Her mother said that she was not the type to leave her jacket behind when it was cold outside, and that she had to have been taken from that apartment. Then, just a few days later, there was another tip, and this is one that also varies from source to source. Some say that this had to do with Carla's boss at her new job. Others say it was actually her friend Eduarda, and others say it was her landlord or other roommate, Jose. But either way, most of them say it was actually her boss, who ended up getting a phone call just a few days after she disappeared. This was from an unknown number, and it was said to be a woman who screamed help. And that was all that was heard before the phone disconnected. Nothing identified it as being Carla, but it also seemed eerie being so close to when she did vanish. And, her boss's phone number would be something that back in 2006 she might have memorized, especially because I don't believe she had a cell phone. This phone call was traced by investigators, and it was placed in an area called Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Now, this is strange only because there was another tip sent in to the Honesville, Pennsylvania Police Department saying that a woman appeared to be being held hostage in a hotel there. However, when both sets of investigators went to search this town or this hotel, they found nothing, and so this lead went nowhere. Now months were going by, and this investigation was going literally nowhere. Her parents were so frustrated because it seemed as though the American media didn't care much at all that this girl had vanished into thin air and had not returned, and she was in a place where she was supposed to be kept safe while being a foreign exchange student. A few articles came out in America and New Jersey in the beginning of this case, but it quickly fizzled out. However, the media in Brazil were reporting on her disappearance over and over, hoping to gain the attention of somebody over in America to really get this case out in the open and investigate it again. A reporter named Carlos Colback was actually using his platform in Brazil at the Gazeta do Povo to write 35 different articles on Carla and her disappearance and what possibly could have happened to her, because he said there are so many Brazilians coming to the United States and it's common for them to be deported or imprisoned, but disappearances are not so common. The story broke away from the typical, he was deported, he was put in jail. She was legal. Her family then began to blame themselves because they didn't speak English. They started to believe that maybe that was why no one wanted to bring her attention in America, because they didn't speak English and couldn't ask for it that way. And so her father, Orlando, was actually trying to make a trip to New Jersey, but he was not yet being granted a visa, so they were kind of just stuck in Brazil, in another country where their daughter had vanished from, with no way to help her and no idea what to do. Brazil's Prime Minister of Justice, named Marcio Thomas Bastos, met with her parents and actually talked to them about participating in a public hearing. Meanwhile, details were coming out that contradicted the original statements made in this case. Carla's family was told that Eduarda was the one to tell the police she had vanished that very next day, right after she disappeared, but then Jose actually told them he was the one to do so. Her family was then informed that Carla actually had a boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, but this boyfriend was named Tiago, and he lived back in Brazil. This was a place called Rio de Janeiro, and he was nowhere near her at the time of her disappearance, so it's not like he could have been involved. However, he did have some interesting information that confirmed some of the family's worst fears that they just kind of kept pushing to the back of their mind because they didn't want to believe it. You see, Jose, the 70-year-old apartment owner that Carla and Eduarda had been staying with, had been acting very strange ever since her disappearance, and this was towards her family, whom he had been friends with. He had told the family she was missing over the phone and then said he knew the area, would search for her, would find her, but then shortly after he left town altogether. It was 4 days after she went missing, and he actually went back to Brazil where her family lived, but did not go see them, didn't tell them he was in Brazil. He was finalizing a divorce, but he didn't even go talk to them about their daughter, whom he was living with, who had just vanished. When he finally did speak to them, he claimed he was also getting calls to his phone from an unknown number, and he could hear a girl crying and struggling in the background, but he couldn't tell if it was Carla or not. And this is when Carla's mother, Tanya, said, "Can you please turn your phone into the police so they can trace this, they can monitor this, and make sure it's not Carla calling asking for help or someone asking for a ransom or anything that could help find her." And that is when Jose told her no. He refused to give the police his phone. The man they had trusted with their daughter to live in this country where she was vulnerable, they gave him the benefit of the doubt that he would protect her, that she could trust him, and now he was looking more and more suspicious, especially since he would have had access to her living arrangements, which was his home, where all of her belongings were found from that night. But it's what Tiago would say to Carla's mother, Tanya, over the phone that cemented this theory for Carla's parents. And Tiago admitted that 2 nights before Carla disappeared, she had called him crying, saying that Jose was sexually harassing her and was making these awful comments, and Carla was crying uncontrollably. Tiago said that it was so bad that Carla had actually already found a place to move in, and she was going to that very next Monday. However, as we know, she never got the chance to. But Jose had already been talked to by police, and he said that he was asleep that whole night and didn't even hear anybody coming in. The problem with that was that Carla was the only one that had the house key. Eduarda didn't, and so she would have needed to be let in when she got off her shift at 4 a.m. And so, was it Carla who let her in? And if so, did Eduarda see her that night after the bar? Or did Jose let Eduarda in, and that was when Carla was already gone? This led to a lot more questions that were unanswered. While everything seemed to become more of a web of tangled lies, the day turned to April 29th, and this was Carla's 23rd birthday. Her mother refused to celebrate, saying, "I told my friends and family, don't remind me it's her birthday. This month has a 28th and a 30th, but no 29th. I'll only remember that day when I have her back." The next month, on May 20th, Tanya was actually able to go to New Jersey, to the place where her daughter would have been that night, and just look around, see if she could find anything that investigators had missed. She stood in front of that very Adega bar and broke down into tears, saying that she was going to explode. It's been said over the tabloids in Brazil that Carla's parents now have to take sleeping pills to be able to sleep because they're so distraught and they just want to be able to live again and know what happened. 4 years later, in 2010, Tanya had gone through all the stages of grief and was finally at acceptance. And she said, "I think that Carla isn't alive because she would have never stayed more than 2 days without contacting the family. Someone destroyed her dream of getting a chance to know a different country." On the 9th anniversary of Carla's disappearance, they had still gotten very few leads, and that is when the FBI got involved. They officially announced their involvement by having a $20,000 reward for any information, and they also put up digital billboards all around New Jersey with her picture, and her photo was also sent out over Facebook and Twitter. They were hoping to renew interest and gain attention, hoping that somebody would come out of the woodworks and admit to what they had done or what they had seen. However, Tanya has said that she's had very strange altercations with the FBI. She said that one FBI agent came out to her and said that they had found that Carla was actually at the bar, not just with like one man, but she was talking to several different people, bouncing around, being social that whole night, and that this whole Antonio guy didn't really exist. He also said it didn't appear that she had left with anyone that night. This was yet another change in events for this evening, and the FBI also uncovered that the one person close to Carla had a link to illegal immigration networks bringing Brazilians to the United States. This was Jose Fernandez himself, and he was being looked into from the FBI for this. Could possibly have connections in the human trafficking market. An American FBI agent named Daniel Clegg, who did live in Brazil and really spoke closely to the family, said that there's no smoking gun or relevant piece of evidence to break this thing open at this point. Yet there was a Senate public hearing in Brazil for this case, and Jose Fernandez was brought in to testify. And this is when he would change his story. You see, he had said that he hadn't heard anything that night. But then, at this Senate hearing, he was saying that he actually heard Carla come in that night and then leave. And then at 4 a.m., about an hour later, he had to go and open the door for Eduarda to let her in because she didn't have a key. He was also victim blaming and saying that Carla and Eduarda were always frequenting bad areas and that they even chose to work at bad locations. He also blamed someone from Eduarda's bar, possibly her management, for having something to do with the disappearance, saying that there were organized gangs in the area. Jose claimed that he was innocent. He had lived in the same house for 42 years. He never hosted girls there before, and he had nothing to do with where Carla had gone. He said this was only a favor. He acted as though this was something that had only affected him and that he had to go through this media circus and that, the mother had been blaming him and that he was so innocent and everything was just looking bad for him. Instead of him thinking about who was supposed to be his friends and the other family and their daughter who was gone. However, Trace Evidence Podcast, which I'll have linked down below, did find that Jose had a son who owned a construction business nearby. And I think we all know what construction areas are used for in a lot of murder cases. Tanya and Orlando actually admitted at this trial that Jose now avoids their family entirely, and they believe he knows more than what he has said. They also said that they tried to talk to Eduarda's father, who is the other foreign exchange student living with Carla, and that he was very standoffish and cold and did not want to talk about anything involving the case. And Eduarda really hasn't spoken up about it either. And the family has also been said not to have been talked to by the Brazilian consulate, who have not been pursuing Carla's case actively. But the consul general, who was Jose Lima, said that 3 to 4 staff members were always in contact with the family. However, Jose then admitted that he didn't even know the state hearing was happening, and that's when the family kind of said, well, yeah, that's because you haven't talked to us in the past 2 months. Many do believe that Carla was kidnapped and forced into sex trafficking, and that her lack of having family in the area, her genuine heart, her inability to speak much English made her a target. Today, she is still missing, and anyone with information is urged to call the FBI's Newark division at 973-792-3000. Now, the conflicting statements in this case is what I believe has caused this case to be unsolved for so long. Do you believe there was more than one person involved? How did everyone see and hear so many different things that night? Was it because it was at a bar and people were drunk, or because they were covering something up? Did it have something to do with the higher ups, whether that was the bar management, the cops, the FBI, or possibly people who knew exactly what they were doing for a sex trafficking scheme and had figured out exactly how to kidnap a girl without anybody knowing the truth. Now, I also want to point out that was Carla's choice of going out to this man's car to look at a photograph the smartest? No, it wasn't. Obviously. We know that because we watch things like this, because we live in a world that is scary, because we've grown up to know that we have to watch out for ourselves. But Carla, this sweet, innocent girl, didn't grow up that way. She hadn't yet experienced that darkness, and so it was not her fault for being sweet and innocent. And I don't want to see any comments blaming this girl. First of all, because we can't even say for certain that that's exactly what she did. We have one statement from Eduarda saying that there was this man she went out to the car with. There was one statement saying she got in a car with a man. We don't know if these were the same men. We don't know if she did this at all. We don't know the truth about anything in this case. Nothing except for the fact that Carla was this beautiful, hardworking, smart girl who was taken from her place of happiness, from a place she dreamed to be, and now can never see her family. Do you think her friend Eduarda knows more than she's letting on? Do you think that it's something that she saw and she was forced to keep quiet, or the same thing would happen to her? You think she was told maybe you're going to be human trafficked as well if you say anything, if you don't go along with our lies? Did she help because she wanted to? I mean, why did she seem to be the only one to bring up this Antonio man? And why did she not really want to talk after she reported her missing and was so concerned, or seemingly so at the beginning? But whether Jose Fernandez was involved in her disappearance at all, he did make her uncomfortable enough that she told her boyfriend she was moving out. That was some quick action on her part that she hadn't even told her boyfriend before getting a new place to live. And then when she did tell him, it was already done. You know, that meant that things happened quickly, that she was so incredibly disturbed that she was fleeing her place where her parents had gotten her, and a place where she didn't even have to pay rent. You don't do that unless you are completely uncomfortable. I think that in itself should have been enough to bring Jose in for intense questioning, but he seemed to be let go of pretty quickly once he said he hadn't seen her or heard anything that night. Did he possibly have connections to the police during that time? What do you believe happened to this beautiful girl? Did her landlord possibly take advantage of her, and then when she tried to get away, something horrible happened? Did he have a plan to get rid of her because she told him no? And was this random man she left the bar with real? Who was he? Why has no one ever come forward saying that was him? Why did nobody else see this man? Is she possibly still alive, trapped in human trafficking? I don't know what the most tragic answer here is, but I hope that the truth is the least painful for Carla. Part of me wants her to still be alive and to survive, to get out of that human trafficking and to get to go back to her family, but that amount of trauma and abuse, I can't imagine what she could be going through, because it's been 15 years since she vanished. She would be 37 years old this year, and she didn't deserve any of this. She just wanted to see a different country, to see the world, and I feel like America really just let her down. Her family didn't feel that we felt any remorse, that we wanted to help, that we felt bad that she had come to our, and I say our because I'm from America, but of course if you don't, this doesn't apply to you, but her family felt that America wasn't helping her, that she had gone to this place and then nobody cared, and that's so heartbreaking to me. So heartbreaking. I mean, we did the case here on my channel of Grace Mullane, who went to New Zealand from America, I believe, and she was murdered there. And New Zealand did so much for her. They put out candlelight vigils. They made huge press conferences. They tried so hard to investigate this for her family, to help in any way. They showed remorse. And yet, I feel like we failed Carla Vincentini. We failed her completely. And it breaks my heart that her family blames themselves because they don't speak English. It was not their fault because they speak Portuguese. It wasn't. It had nothing to do with that. And yet they have to internalize that because that seems like the only likely theory. Since why else would nobody want to help them? So I'm very happy to be able to bring this case to you. I know Trace Evidence has done it. I know Amber Love's Mystery has done it, but I haven't seen it a ton. I will always have everybody linked below who does it, but if I could ask you to do anything, it's just to share her poster. You can find it online, screenshot a picture of Carla, and just put it out on your social media. And just tell people about the case, about the fact that she vanished off the face of the earth. And she deserves to come home. And her family deserves answers. I so wish that I could give you an answer and that this is a solved case and that we could know what happened, but that's simply just not the case. And it's still so important to tell these stories because sometimes there aren't answers and sometimes we have to fight really hard for them. But I still believe that we can know what happened to Carla and that her parents can get the closure they deserve. So speak up. Your voice is powerful enough. And I love you to absolute pieces.